I think because we don't have Don for much longer, we should jump into protesting in church and the allegations of charging him with the KKK Act. So let us roll this clip from y'all's Assistant Attorney General, Harmeet Dillon, and what she had to say about prosecuting Don Lemon and others.
It's off limits to go into a house of worship to do your little protest. Protests can occur on public property. Protests can occur outside, on a sidewalk, certain sidewalks, not all sidewalks. And this is like basic what you learn in the first year of law school. It is a time, place, and manner restrictions on the First Amendment right of protest, and they were violated here in this case. No question about it. The only question is who was involved, how many were involved, and how many charges are going to be brought here? Those are the questions.
So what I think is important here, I just want to remind y'all that this all is going down on Martin Luther King Day. So your Assistant Attorney General goes on a show with this conservative influencer. Earlier in the show talks about potentially prosecuting Don Lemon and others who were in the church under the KKK Act, also known as the Enforcement Act of 1871. 1871. More on that in a second. She later stated that individuals could also be charged under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. This, I think, is important as a backdrop. And we can also pull up the tweet, Nick, where the Assistant Attorney General references the FACE Act. There's another from Donald Trump on Truth Social about what he thinks should happen to protesters who went into this church. So, Don, if you can talk to the audience a little bit about why you were in this church, whose church it was, and why they saw fit to even be there. You were there reporting.
Yes, I was there reporting, and I don't even know the name of the church. I don't even know the name of the pastor who was there, but I do know the name of the pastor who was alleged to be, and now has been confirmed by the church to be like some sort of coordinating agent or something of ICE, a directing agent of ICE.
Acting field director, David Easterwood.
Right, David Easterwood, and that he was a pastor in the church. And so that group said that they went there to protest that. I didn't even know what place they were going. It was an organization that people said were doing, they had sent out a flyer, and they were a protest group, and they had been protesting what was happening in Minneapolis. And I landed in Minneapolis and said, sure, I'll follow them. I'll just go chronicle what they're doing. And so when I found out it was a church, I sat back for a bit and I said, let them do their thing. Did I know they were going to go in there? Of course they're going to go in there. That's what they do, or go in there or around the church. I wasn't sure if they were going to go inside or go around the church or whatever. I didn't know what their actions would be, but I knew that I wanted to report on it because that's part of what was happening that day. And so when they went into the church, I stood there and waited for a bit and waited, and then I saw other members of the press going in, and so I walked in. When I saw when the unrest happened, I walked in and just started saying, "Hey, look, this group is over here. It's chaos right there. They're chanting this. There are parishioners and church members over here who are upset. And let me go over and talk to the pastor. Pastor, how do you feel about this happening in the church?" And then he did his thing. And then I went over to some of the parishioners. I said, "What do you feel about this?" If they said they didn't want to talk, I said, "I understand." And I moved on. And then I talked to afterwards the members of the group that had organized the protest. And that was it. I left. And then somehow I became somehow I became the face of it. I'm like, I'm not the face of it. I'm not a protester. And I kept saying to them, when people would say, "Why are you guys, what do you?" I said, "Sir, I'm not one of the protesters. I'm just here. I'm a journalist and I'm here reporting." And that's it. Would you like to say something? And then that's it. So,
well, you know why you're the
right.
the face of it, because you are Don Lemon. That's one. Two, the KKK Act don't even apply
at all.
So I don't even know what that is.
The KKK
D.L.
Act
Hughley
was passed.
said he can't appear on my show anymore because he's not going to be on any KKK member shows.
There you go. It was passed during Reconstruction, and the purpose of it was to suppress the KKK and protect African Americans. Ironically, she's saying she's going to prosecute you using this act. It was the reason for it was to protect African Americans and ensure their access to due process, access to hold office, and access to serve on juries. Because what was happening was the KKK, they were getting together and they were going out and intimidating folk. And they were like, we need to make sure we keep this from happening. Nothing that you said, the contours or context of what you said falls under the KKK Act. So that's first. Second,
Of course.
nobody should really have an issue with Don Lemon going in there and covering the movement or covering a protest, because journalists cover protests, and I believe you have the right to cover it wherever you should or wherever you want to. The third thing, though, is where I disagree with all of y'all, in that I don't think you or believe you should protest in church. I believe that to be holy ground. I believe that to be sacrosanct. And I don't mind people covering a protest. My problem is with the protesters. And the reason being is because where do you draw the line? It's an extremely slippery slope. And one of the houses of worship that I find near and dear to my heart is Mother Emanuel AME. And in January of 2024, when Joe Biden was in there speaking, it was crashed by some far left, not even far left, but some left-wing Charleston national protesters. And, you know, it was just a bunch of older Black folk in there trying to pray, worship. And Mother Emanuel is a sacred place for a lot of us. I mean, it just warms our spirit. A lot of us, and we're not trying to go to church to have it interrupted by protesters, particularly for this or that. And so I just find that to be a very slippery slope. If you're like, oh, well, we can just protest ICE. Well, who's to keep somebody from protesting single payer health care or whatever it may be? And that for me, it's a very personal thing. I'm not trying to impose it on anybody else. That just crosses the line for me.
Bakari,
really quick, can I yeah.
Couldn't disagree.
Can I just say one thing and then I'll go? I don't disagree with you, but it's not my it's not my job to judge whether it's appropriate.
You're not the arbiter.
It's my job to cover it. And so, as a Christian, yes, it may be uncomfortable. And I even said that in the report. I can understand why people are uncomfortable here. Look at the kid; people are consoling their children, or whatever. I can understand that. But as a journalist, you know, I mean, I may have to cover in a war zone. I may not agree with what our country is doing, but it's not my job when I'm covering it to say that. It's my job to cover it and then let the people decide.
Oh, I agree with that.
I can talk about whether it's appropriate or not in another way. So I actually feel very close to similar as you feel about it.
But I mean, like without the transparency.
The movement to our liberation was fomented in the church. The meetings that led to bus boycotts, that led to table counter protests, that led to, in some cases, the admonishment of our skinfolk who were not our kinfolk.
Correct. And the pastors did. Pastors spoke of it all the time.
Yes, but not all pastors, right? Do you remember a letter from Birmingham jail was directed at all those, religious, super religious, Black, white, and otherwise pastors who said, not here. Not
and
now.
Reverend Jackson hated King so much in Chicago, he changed his address. Correct.
You're making the point. Right?
I guess
so. I don't know how we go from, and I'll stop here, Angela, because I haven't said much by way of opinion here so far. But I don't think Hermeet Dillon ought to be setting up the case for whether or not protest in churches is or is not correct. This is the same woman who would not allow her division of civil rights, which is supposed to ensure to our civil liberties and our civil rights within this here country, decided that she wasn't going to investigate the officer who killed Mrs. Good. Now, I know that the facts remain to be laid out, but the federal government has already said they're not launching an investigation against Ms. Good's killer. This is the same woman who decided to dismiss summarily all of the consent decrees that preceded her from the last administration, holding those communities accountable who had committed atrocious violations of civil rights acts all around the country. She's got no grounds to tell us what is and is not appropriate. I'm deeply offended by the fact that she even gets to carry this title, and certainly that we have to refer to her as a Department of Justice deputy, because this department is anything but just. That's not what they represent. So she doesn't get to set up this frame for me. I reject that. But I just want us to keep in mind and consider, what if this were a different day and time? And quite frankly, it feels like maybe similar day and time, but a different day and time, say 1958, 1954, 1960, 63, at a different part of the country, would we be clamoring for our church spaces to be the places in which we not only organize, but also go to protest to let our voices be heard, to fight amongst each other before we then descend out into the streets with a unified voice and message to move our communities forward?
But Andrew, that's not what this is, though.
But I'm not being selective about the fact that there are some places where you have to go. Paula White here in Florida. How you gonna hold up the gospel of Christ on Sunday And then on Monday, you are treading barbs against our communities, all of our communities, as you pretend to be pastoral, moral advisor to President Trump. It just doesn't sink. So
listen, my point is, I agree with, as we oftentimes find ourselves, about 75% of what you said. I agree with the offensive nature of the associate attorney general. I think she's out of her depth. I don't think she deserves her job, all of those things. I think that her interpretation of the KKK Act is like somebody just told her that before she went on air, right? I mean, it's just flatly wrong. But again, we're going back to the point that they can be mediocre and still achieve these high levels of power. We covered that a little bit earlier. But I think that you are highlighting and conflating two issues. Like, yes, the church was the central meeting point. Yes, the church was a point of organization. Yes, the church was a place where you could go out and articulate from the well of the pulpit. Nobody does that better right now than Raphael Warnock, right? Ebenezer Baptist Church, Raphael Warnock goes up there and he talks about the scripture, equates that to making sure that we understand Sunday is not the only day that we do this, making sure that we're out there doing God's work Monday through Saturday, basically relying on the scripture as a blueprint. I agree with all of that.
Yeah,
I'm saying,
leaving protesting until it treads on us, right?
Yeah, but where I am, what bothers me though is in that house of worship, a place where we were stripped of everything that we had when we came here except faith, where we hold it to be sacrosanct, where we hold it to be a place of home. And yes, we can argue and bicker because black folk bicker and argue in the church more than anywhere else. What I'm saying though is for an outside body, because that's what a protest is, to come in. To come into our church home, to come into our home, regardless of what it may be, and to protest something.
Why do you feel that way,
political.
Bakari? That's what. Can we get to what behind why you feel that way?
I really want to chime in here because I think that there's. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the why is that I don't feel like we have many spaces that are our own. I don't feel that we have spaces that we can have a certain level of peace. I don't feel like there are spaces where you can go in and rest in your thoughts, in your faith, in your worship. I mean, I go sit at Potter's house and be up there crying in that moment. The last thing I want somebody to do is come in there and protest because I don't like Bernie Sanders. Like that is for me something that I find to be mine and my Lord, and I want to have that time. And I ain't protesting in nobody's church. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to tell you this. Like, there's a difference between fascism faith and Black liberation theology. And so I think that the main thing that we're conflating here now is that all places of worship are made equal. I want to remind the audience that the purpose of this particular protest is because David Easterwood, who is a pastor at City's Church, is the field director, the acting field director for St. Paul, for ICE in St. Paul. Renee Good was killed. The protest was because Renee Good was killed under that man's leadership. And so it would be one thing if they were protesting scripture. It would be one thing if they were protesting the fact that they didn't like this particular pastor because they don't like what he preached about last Sunday. It would be another thing as well, Bakari, if people went to Mother Emanuel to protest the fact that Dylan Roof didn't get a big enough cheeseburger on the other side of killing the parishioners at Bible study. What we're talking about are people who are protesting because their lives are at risk. What we're talking about is people who took on the mantle of Jesus in Matthew 21, verses 12 and 13, when he flipped the tables over. We're talking about protesting Pharisees and Sadducees, not Gentiles who don't know any better. We're talking about protesting people who act under the color of law, people who are acting under fake moral authority, not what is biblically true, not what is loving your neighbor as yourself, not what is feeding the poor, not what is taking care of the migrants, not what is taking care of people who are imprisoned, incarcerated, and being done wrong, clothing the naked. They took a naked man outside of his house, fresh out of the shower, with this ICE. So I think that we've got to differentiate between.
But how do you differentiate? How do you? My point to you
is
very
simple. It's very simple. It's immoral. They're protesting what is immoral under the color of the cloth.
But I mean, we just had a protest. We had a protest in Mother Emanuel that wasn't about a cheeseburger. We had these people who came in and protested Joe Biden.
So I think
why do you think a church is off limits? Why is that off limits? So do we deem religion to be off limits? Because that's problematic too. Because you ever been in an argument with someone and they say, because God said so. And then
No,
you go,
I don't think that religion
They
is
said
off
God
limits.
said so for slavery.
I
if
mean,
we're
I don't think religion is off limits. I mean, in fact, I think that religion as a vessel for protest. I mean, I just took my kids out to see the Buddhist monks that are traveling from Houston,
Yeah.
Texas. They're walking 2,300 miles, and I just, it's not my religion, it's not my faith, but I wanted my kids to be able to be a part of that movement, see things. They got a chance to meet the monks, meet Aloka, the little dog. But my point is this: we're setting this arbitrary red line, or this arbitrary line that houses of worship. And that is what bothers me. I mean, houses of worship
You
are
set the
different.
line, bro.
You
Huh?
You
set the
established the
line.
red line. I don't believe there is a line.
No, but no. But I'm responding to Angela, because Angela was dictating that all churches are not created equal. Which, although
not.
I agree, trust me, I do agree with. Who is the arbiter of that line? My line
Can I
is very
ask you
clear.
something?
My line
Can
Me,
is
ask you
white
something,
I
red.
think it's God. I think it's
Yes,
God,
ma'am.
and it's the God
Yes,
in
sir.
me.
I think
All
that
right, it's
look,
the God in
I
me.
understand how you feel as
Mary,
a
Mary.
Christian, as a practicing Christian. I understand how you feel about that. But I would also have to ask you about, what if there were people whose children had been abused by priests? Would you
Yes.
not want them to go into a Catholic church and say, that man abused my child? That man sexually assaulted my 9 or 10 or 7, whatever. Would it be like, oh, you can't tell your truth because you just can't go into a church?
No, I mean, I think you can go. Like, I think that if you have a child who is a victim of child sex abuse, like in your example, and you are someone who stands up and says, in that spirit, it comes over you, and you speak your truth in that moment, right? That is what the church is for. If you're speaking your truth, that is what the church is for. But hold on. And he was also talking about a member of that church, or somebody who had a relationship with that
So
church.
relevance.
What I'm talking about is creating an outside entity that has no affiliation with the church at all and protesting that church or inside that church. I mean, we're talking about,
but they're not choosing that church for no reason, right?
What if it's a group of people who are protesting against child sex abuse, and some of the child sex abusers are in that church?
I mean, I think that we can go down this path and have these exceptions, and I think that there are places and
There are
times
exceptions, B.
there are
even in
places
the
and
law.
times that we trying to create more exceptions too. But
No.
my biggest problem is that we are saying that this is okay. This is okay because this is an issue that drives us. This is okay because all 4 of us are completely outraged by the behavior of ICE. That is a similarity, and that is a message that all of us convey today. ICE is fucking up and destroying people's neighborhoods. I agree with that. However, when Andrew Gillum or Bakari Sellers or Angela Rye speak at the next church, and we are rolling through talking about the pain and the fight for Black liberation, and then you have a group of Moms for Liberty, have no affiliation with that church, come into church and say, you niggas are bad for society.
Yes,
You're bad for life.
if they wanted to shoot their shot in that way, come on in, right? Because the environment will curate its own experience for
And
you,
I mean,
right?
we
when
had
you
that.
make the
I mean,
choice,
we
I'm
had
just
that in
saying
Mother
we
Emanuel.
don't get to be selective about what issue necessitates protests
I
at
think that's
a church
right,
as a
Itchy.
venue. I think whatever it is, because people don't generally just randomly show up in churches to protest for no reason. Usually people are engineered by something that has occurred. There is usually a connection, and that provides the moral clarity for the people who are part of that protest to be in that place at that time. I just think in today's society, and quite frankly, for our community, it's been that way since jump in this country. But in today's society, where churches, particularly white evangelical churches,
back up,
are
Andrew,
the
'cause
organizing
you said
centers
this
for
twice.
politics.
You
For the
said this twice.
organizing centers of politics, I don't understand how we then draw the line.
But you
that
said this twice, and
you
it's
can
not
use
right.
a church to organize a protest. You
said
just
this-
can't execute one there.
You said this twice. Can you name me throughout history, using your civil rights direct line and metaphor, can you name me an organized protest that Black folk have had in opposition inside of a house of worship?
Oh, we've had them.
Yeah,
we've
when
had
Black
them in our
people
own
had to integrate
churches.
churches,
What our
integrating Black
pastor
people,
may have
integrating
said.
churches and going in
No,
and
I
sitting
am not-
in the pew of churches. That's a form of protest.
I am not
Bakari,
talking
I'm not
about-
talking
go
about
ahead.
large scale. I'm not talking about large scale movement, March on Washington
That's
type stuff.
that's
But
what
I
I'm
have been
talking-
a part
I'm-
of congregations where people have come in and protested, including I've seen in my community people who have come in and protested the pastor who is sleeping with this person's
I'm not
sister.
talking. I'm like not talking about like
what you're doing is you're attempting to curate.
Beef.
You're trying to
But this
curate
is also
what that
interchurch
experience
beef
is.
because the
Of course it
interchurch
is.
beef is that they are not abiding
You
by
can't say
scripture.
what you say
you
on
literally
Sunday.
have someone who is the pastor of the church
I
facilitating
meant
ICE
intra. I meant
abuse.
intra, not enter. I meant intra. But go ahead. I'm
Well,
sorry.
all I'm saying is this. Let me just reference the law because you referenced KKK Act. We know that was created under Reconstruction. But also, this Assistant Attorney General references the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act of 1994. You know, the sponsor was the late Ted Kennedy. The reason I'm bringing this up is as a compromise. Places of worship were integrated into this particular legislation, but this was really about people who are defacing clinics where people were getting abortions. Now, they say specifically in this bill that there's nothing in here that should be taking away activities protected by free speech or free exercise clause of the First Amendment. And I think that it is very important that we decipher between the two. We can feel disrespected. We can feel afraid.
Sure.
We can feel concerned that people are in places that we normally deem sacred. But what should be more sacred than anything else in this life, in this country, is life itself.
That's
and this
right.
woman's life was taken from her. So these pro-life people at this city's church and their acting ICE director, who is also their pastor, should have to make a statement, should have to be clear about where they stand in this. Donald Trump is even saying, well, ICE has made some mistakes. He's being very cavalier about it. But at least he's even acknowledging that they've made mistakes. This pastor's not doing that. And I think
Angela,
that our folks have every right to demand that he says something, if nothing else, an apology to her family.
Angela, I agree with you. I simply just want to align myself with, I am issue agnostic about what the protests may be or may be about. I understand that there are many of us who hold in our hearts, our churches, sacrosanct. There are people who also hold their traffic time, the streets that they go on to get from and to work, sacrosanct, and do not believe you should be able to come into the intersection and disrupt that. Protest is fine so long as it doesn't disrupt me. But the meaning of protest, the very essence of why we do it, is to shake you out of your normal, to do something so drastic, so different, so capturing, and quite frankly, out of place for the moment, that I hold your attention so that you get to hear what it is that I have to say. Again, I think, obviously, I consider my church space sacred, my prayer time sacred, my home sacred, and so many other things. And there are laws around all of that. But protest by its essence, at its depth, at its very meaning, is to, frankly, to cause you to say amen or ouch. And more of us will likely say ouch, because it is happening out of our comfort zone. And that is the point.
Well, y'all, let's just
I
warn
agree
the
with it or
audience.
you agree with
ahead.
it. Here's whether I agree with it or you agree with it, and I am torn. I have mixed feelings about it. I still believe that my role as a journalist, not as a protester, is protected under the First Amendment, and
real.
it should be chronicled.
I agree with that.
It should be chronicled because then you don't know imagine if there were no journalists there.
Yeah.
And it was not chronicled and it was not recorded. They could have made things up about what the protesters did. The protesters could have made things up about, and now you see it all on camera. And that is the role of a journalist. So,
and we need you. We
I think
need you, and the First Amendment also needs you, and we also need Congress. But do they need to be?
We also need Jesus.
We need
Jesus.
But I was just going to say, I
is.
think we all four of us will agree. You walk up and protest in the black church, your experience, to use
At your own
Andrew's
risk.
term, will be curated.
Now that's the point. Now you might
your
not
own
end up
risk.
outside of the protest at a black
Yes.
church, but we won't
At
talk
your
about
own
that.
risk.
We
better
didn't get
stick
to
to
that part.
put some flyers on the cars. Don't come up.
That's
in there
why I
talking
said,
about
if
it.
you feeling real froggy, you want to leap, okay, you go ahead. I
gonna leap right
defended
into
your
that
right to protest,
baptismal
but
pool.
hey, at your own
When
risk.
you walk into the church, there's a big sign on the door that says, "Don't start none."
Won't be none.
Native Land Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.